Terms of Lane Kiffin's contract with LSU have leaked. We'll react to it next. Locked on LSU. Here we go.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked On LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. We're free, available wherever you get podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. As always, one of the fastest ways to help us grow is by leaving your comments below. So thank you sincerely for that. And thank you for helping make the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network in the world. We're humbled and flattered to be here. So thank you for being here. Well, all of the conversation about Lane Kiffin took another advancement late on Friday night when Ross Dellinger at Yahoo reported terms of Lane Kiffin's offer from LSU. It is important to note that Ross did not say that this has been a formal offer yet. He did not notice or note that it was finalized or signed. As he said, that LSU administrators are, quote, finalizing terms of a multi-million-dollar contract proposal and seeking commitment from Lane Kiffin here within the next week. So it is important to note that on Friday, LSU, the Board of Supervisors, held a meeting, and the public agenda of that meeting was dealing with Brian Kelly's buyout. Now, because these were contract terms, they went into executive session, which is not open to the public. So the meeting opened, was available to the public, closed, open to the public, but the executive session, not open to the public. And I'm told that in that executive session, not only did they discuss Brian Kelly's buyout, but also the terms of a potential deal with the coach they are pursuing, which very clearly is Lane Kiffin. Not surprising that after that on Friday is when Ross Dellinger leaked these terms. So here's the particulars, and then I'll react to it. Ross Dellinger is reporting at Yahoo 7 years, $90 million, and it's an incentive-laden deal. Now, this kind of falls in line with what we had initially talked about here. And if you're an everydayer, shout out, you've heard this. But the initial numbers that I was told 4 weeks ago was something in the neighborhood of 6 years, $84 million, which would be an average of $14 million per year, which would make Lane Kiffin the highest paid coach in the country. You've heard me say that multiple times. But that's a starting point. And then obviously, you negotiate with Lane Kiffin's representatives, in this case, Jimmy Sexton. And so maybe Sexton wanted another year, a little more money. But there is always give and take where it's a quid pro quo. You give a little, they get a little. And so in this situation, what LSU was willing to do clearly is add the extra year, a little more money. And in that instance, Sexton gets what he wants. LSU, according to Dellinger, has worked what they termed a, quote, incentive-laden deal. That's how Ross termed it. Now, that's also not anything that should be terribly different or uncommon based on what we've talked about here. You might recall that several weeks ago I explained to you, and this isn't unique to me, I had several agents explain this, and this is how NFL deals with players are often structured. You'll hear about incentives in deals. And there's two different types of incentives. There's LTBE, which are likely to be earned incentives, and then NLTBE, not likely to be earned incentives. And obviously, if you hit the not likely to be earned incentives, there are financial escalators that are much greater. So, for example, if you use an NFL example, if let's say hypothetically, you hear about roster bonuses. If Joe Burrow is on the Cincinnati Bengals roster, he gets a roster bonus. Okay, well, that's a likely to be earned bonus. Of course, he's going to be on the roster. Well, then what if there's an MVP bonus? If he wins the NFL MVP, there's another escalator. I'm using it as a hypothetical. I don't know what Joe Burrow's contract looks like. So there would be a not likely to be earned bonus, and then he would get that much larger incentive. So as I understand it, that's some of the structure factored in here. For example, a likely to be earned incentive could be you make a bowl game. Okay, well, you get to 6 wins, you make a bowl game, boom, you have an incentive. A not likely to be earned incentive would be the SEC championship game. And we've seen bonuses worked into coaches' contracts for stuff like this throughout the years, but it could be more heavily weighted toward these things. SEC championship game, playoff appearance, championship game appearance, championship win. Again, I haven't seen the contract, so a little bit is speculative, but you can sort of piece together how this is all coming together. It's also important to note in Ross Dellinger's piece, he said that this contract has the blessing of Governor Jeff Landry. And you may roll your eyes and shrug at that, but you rewind the clock a month, and 4 weeks ago, we know how this all exploded when the governor at that press conference made his statements known and his feelings known in no uncertain terms, that he was tired of seeing contracts with huge buyouts that left the, as he put it, the state on the hook, which we know is not actually accurate. But the governor apparently has been made aware of this, according to Ross Dellinger, and is okay with it. I will tell you that on Friday night, after Ross's report, I did personally reach out to both Governor Landry and his communications director. The governor did not immediately reply. His communications director did. I was asking first if the governor was aware of this report, and she made it known that he was not aware of the report at the time because he was at a Thanksgiving party on Friday night, a gathering on Friday night, so he could not have been aware that the report leaked on Friday night. As far as if he was okay with the terms of the contract, she could not confirm that. So I don't have personal confirmation. I am efforting that, but Ross Dellinger says, based on his reporting, that the governor is okay with this deal. That is a significant hurdle because the last thing any of us want to see is politics and sports blending again in an ugly situation where the governor might make some type of comment and go viral again because he disapproves of the contract for Lane Kiffin. The other part of this that's interesting is sort of the timing and the fact that this contract and these terms were leaked. Because I did get a call on Saturday from someone affiliated with LSU that was not happy that the terms of the deal leaked, or excuse me, that CAA, of course, Jimmy Sexton, the agent who represents Lane Kiffin, works for CAA, that CAA was not happy that the terms of the deal leaked, which would kind of lead you to believe that someone either at LSU or on Lane Kiffin's side leaked it, not the agent. Now, I think there's two ways to look at this, and I don't know that that's totally because I have been asked the question, and you may be wondering, like, would this spook Lane Kiffin that the terms of the deal got leaked? I have a couple of thoughts here. There's two different types of ways to go through a bidding process. If you're watching, not listening, I wear a Parrish hat and shirt. So it's Parrish Construction and Roofing. It's a company I'm a partner in. There are times when we go through a bid process for a job and it's a sealed bid. So you put together you get the specs of the job, you put together your bid, it's sealed, and then the lowest bidder wins the job. So you're incentivized there to try to find a way to cut, not inflate numbers, and make it as reasonable a price as possible where you can make money, but and do the job appropriately. The other way to do it is like an auction style, right? Where everybody knows the bid. And in that instance, sometimes the prices can elevate. Well, if you're CAA, what do you want here? Do you want a closed bid where you're making schools, LSU, Florida, Ole Miss, whomever it may be, bid against each other when they don't know what the market cap is or what the market's set at? Or do you want an auction style where everybody knows the number? And so if you want to play ball, this is the number you got to beat. And sometimes, y'all, if you've ever been in an auction, either at a charity event or like one of those real high-end auctions, if you ever watched them, sometimes you get really rich people in a room that get motivated to buy something, and you get into what's called a bidding war. It's where the phrase comes from. It's just people who don't want to lose. And so sometimes they end up overpaying because they don't want to lose. My thought in this situation is, I think, I'm guessing here, by the way, it's just speculative, CAA wants these numbers out there. They want the 90 million out there. They want the 7 years, 90 million. They want the number out there to see if maybe Florida jumps in or Ole Miss can top it or whatever. Remember, Lane Kiffin's agent, Jimmy Sexton, his job is to get the best deal for his client. And yeah, he wants to put him in a situation where he can win and have success and all that stuff. But his job is get the best deal for his client. It behooves him to have this number out there to get the best deal for his client. Because now really rich people at Ole Miss and Florida can look and say, well, let's go beat that. What if we give him 95? What's another 5 million? Anybody? Hey, pass the hat. Can anybody else get $5 million? Lane Kiffin has said this deal isn't going to be made solely based on money. And I believe him, by the way. He's going to make money no matter where he goes. I think he wants to win championships. So that's the other part of this is, okay, if the objective is win championships, what else is in this deal that shows that's the path they're following? Well, that's something else Ross reported, was that the money, the NIL money on top of the revenue share is a giant number that LSU promised. And I want to add some color and context to that as we continue. And I want to talk a little bit about the buyout structure. We'll get to that as we continue here. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. College football is back, and I couldn't be more excited. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands, there's just nothing like it. But let's be real. Actually getting tickets can feel like more of a battle than the game itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping at checkout. That's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. I pulled up Game Time, and in just a couple of taps, I saw amazing deals. I'm talking about your favorite college football games as low as $25. I love zone deals, too. You pick the section, and then Game Time picks the seats, and you save big. So take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Today's show is also brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of the game or you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. One of the gigantic conversations we have to have about the Lane Kiffin contract, obviously, is the buyout, considering everything that's transpired here with Brian Kelly and his buyout. Now, as I mentioned, I have not seen the contract that that LSU is preparing for Lane Kiffin. I have had some of the things that Ross Dellinger disclosed to me, not in that detail, but if I would love to get more detail on the buyout structure. But what I can say is I think that the way they have structured this buyout, based on what I've heard, is fascinating and really smart. And it's going to be a way such that if Lane Kiffin doesn't win, the buyout reduces. If Lane Kiffin wins, the buyout stays robust. And that sounds very obvious, but we just haven't had that until this point. And we go back to the quid pro quo, that you give a little, I give a little. And this is one of those bargaining chips where Sexton may be willing to look and say, okay, you're going to give my guy more money. We'll lighten up on the back end on the buyout, especially if you think this is going to go well with the hiring process, which I think most people assume it will with Lane Kiffin. So the other part of that I think is really relevant is how you arrived at this structure. Remember when Verge Osbury was introduced as the interim athletic director? It was that Friday press conference. And he announced his committee. It was what eventually became Dr. Wade Roos, who's the president of the university, along with board members Scott Ballard, John Carmouche, and then two other men. Ben Bordelon, who played football at LSU. He's got two sons on the team right now, and he's the CEO of Bollinger. And then E.J. Kuiper, who's the president CEO of the FMOL Health System, of course, which Our Lady of the Lake is a part. And candidly, they're a sponsor here on the show. So you have those men on this committee. And the point I made at the time, and we'll reiterate here, is you could say, well, I want former coaches and players on the committee to pick the coach. Yes, you want people that know football and who may fit and all that sort of stuff. Well, Verge Osbury checks that box. Ben Bordelon checks that box. You better believe that they've taken consult from other people. We've talked about it here. Verge has a standing conversation every 2 to 3 weeks with Nick Saban. You better believe he's asked Nick Saban's opinion. And they steered him toward Lane Kiffin. And then Saban similarly has told Lane Kiffin he should take LSU over Florida. I mean, these are all things that I've not only reported, that multiple people have reported because it's factual. But The other people on this committee, I think it's a brilliant decision to put them on because they are all wildly successful business people. For example, EJ Kuiper, who's the president and CEO of the FMOL health system, that is a $4.5 billion health system, a $4.5 billion health system. That man, every day of his life, deals with and negotiates multi-million-dollar contracts. It's a giant part of what they do. Revenue generation, expansion for the health system, facilities deals, like massive contracts. So yes, how do you structure giant deals like this to make sense where you give protections? Well, why not treat it like a business would? Not necessarily just hiring a football coach and paying him a salary. How would you structure this as a business deal? Well, let's go ask people that run gigantic, 9-figure businesses, 10-figure businesses, how they would run their business. So, and how they would do deals. I think it's how you arrive at something that's very smart, like this buyout structure. So again, I don't have specifics on the structure, and I wish I could give them to you here today. I'm going to keep working hard to try to get some of those, and maybe it'll just be ultimately when the contracts are released, we all have them. But I think the way that LSU has worked to structure the buyout is very smart and is going to make a lot of sense when we see it. Now, the other component that we talked about was NIL. Now, remember, on July 1st, the House settlement went into effect, which means collectives can no longer just pay student athletes. There's a revenue share. It's the $20.5 million of revenue that athletic departments can choose to share with their student athletes. That's $20.5 million to be divided among all sports. Now, generally, big programs like LSU, the way that's structured is 75% of that money, roughly $14-15 million, is going to be allocated for football. So every school is going to have that $14-15 million to spend on football if they participate in the rev share, which all the big schools will. The real question is, okay, you have this $14-15 million to spend on your roster. How do we go above that number? Well, the answer is NIL. The complicated part is NIL is not structured any longer the way it was structured with collectives. Remember, collectives could just write a check and hand it off to the student athlete. It was pay for play. That's no longer allowed. Every single deal over $600 has to go through the NIL Go clearinghouse, which is managed by Deloitte. Basically, this independent firm has to decide, okay, business X wants to pay player Y this amount of money for these deliverables. Is that market value? That's to say, you can't just write a check for $300,000 to get a backup lineman to take a picture for your website. That's not market value. Those deals will not get approved any longer. It has to be real, true, third-party NIL where brands are doing deals with the student athletes. Well, how can you guarantee that? It's very difficult. That's why the NILSU Max program is so important. I'm going to explain this in a second, but remember, if you're an everydayer, you heard me talk about this in previous episodes where Lane Kiffin, when he went into that meeting with Keith Carter wanted clarity on Kiffin's stance. Kiffin wanted to know their NIL plan. There was few teams in the country that were as proactive at the start of the NIL portal era as Ole Miss. Lane Kiffin was the self-described portal king. Ole Miss funded the Grove Collective very well, and they were able to go buy a roster. Few did it as well as Ole Miss. Well, that advantage is no longer there. You can't just fund your collective and pay players. All of the money has to go through true NIL brand deals. Well, then it comes down to what brands are the most valuable around the country and how can you do those deals? That's why LSU was so proactive in this space. Now, Ross Dellinger is reporting that LSU is committed $25 million annually in those brand deals. So if you can't just pay players any longer, then how can LSU guarantee Lane Kiffin $25 million in NIL brand deals? It's one thing just to say, we're going to give you $40 million for the roster. It's another when you can show a plan how to do that. Glad you asked. Back on March the 11th, I went and pulled this audio for you. Not going to make you go dig for it. I went and pulled it for you. Back on March the 11th of 2025, okay? So this was early 2025. We're talking 8 months ago. I had a conversation on my radio show after further review on ESPN Radio in Baton Rouge and syndicated throughout Louisiana with Clay Harris. Clay Harris is LSU's Associate Athletic Director for Revenue Generation. It's long on the business card. Just know Clay's job is go find creative ways for us to make money and to do NIL deals. That in this era, find creative ways for us to make money. So I had this conversation with Clay when LSU launched NILSU Max. And NILSU Max, I don't want to complicate you. I don't want to confuse you. I'm sure a lot of you, some of you are following me. If you're not, I'm not going to confuse you on this. But LSU launched the NILSU Max program, which basically is this. LSU, in partnership with Playfly Sports, its multimedia rights director, think the LSU Sports Radio Network, signage in the stadium, all the social media, all of the properties LSU owns, multimedia, where they're able to go sell and make money. They do a deal with Playfly, so Playfly goes and gets brand deals with giant companies like Coca-Cola and Powerade and all those giant companies to do these brand deals. Well, LSU said, let's do NILSU Max, where you do the same thing for our student athletes, using our brand, our leverage, to go work with the companies these hundreds of companies you're working with across all these different universities and in countries, and do brand deals with our student athletes. Okay. That was so cutting edge. I want to put some perspective on this. I asked Clay Harris this was 8 months ago. This was months before the rev share went into play, because this was March 11th. July 1 is when rev share went into place. I asked Clay Harris on March the 11th how long they've been working on this.
It's spring, at the very minimum, spring of last year. I mean, we're 12 to 18 months in discussions of all this. And it's funny because it still changes every single day, but this has been a lot of behind the scenes work for, 18 months or so.
12 to 8 months ago, LSU's chief revenue officer told me 8 months ago, he told me they've been already working on this for 12 to 18 months. LSU was so much on the forefront of this. And it's interesting because at the start of NIL, LSU was not on the forefront. When NIL went live July 1st of 2021, they brought Livy Dunn to Times Square and they had the NILSU billboards basically saying we're open for business, when a lot of schools were still pushing back against NIL. The problem was LSU was not fundraising for their collective. They did not have a collective structure in place. They said we're open for business, but they didn't really have a plan of how they were going to generate dollars. And that really hurt them, by the way. And, it was interesting because when I had this conversation with Clay, I said, look, you all weren't at the forefront 4 years ago, but it feels like you are now.
We have come a long way since probably 2 years ago. I think the NILSU Max announcement plus where we stand on the $20.5 million. I think we are in the forefront of things at this moment. Maybe couldn't say that a year ago, but with some great alignments and integrations we've had with PATH in the past year with Bayou Traditions, and then now this new NILSU Max arrangement, it's definitely shifted. And I think you've seen that with some of the performances, on and off the court at LSU. But I think we are positioned to be in the tops of the SEC when it comes to this going forward.
I love the candor. He's acknowledging that wasn't always the case. They were behind. It's something a lot of LSU fans didn't like me saying for the first 2 years of NIL. LSU was behind. They didn't fundraise. It was evident in their roster. Look at men's basketball. Look at football in 2023 and 2024. You were behind. But they recognized it and they looked at what was coming, the new era, this era. And now because they were so on the forefront of NILSU Max with rev share, they are now positioned at the start of this era to be among the top schools, not in the country, in the conference, but the country. Like, listen to Clay explain the plan that they have.
Playfly and NILSU Max, there's going to be a pretty structured rate card, and we're going to have everything from autograph sessions to appearances to commercial advertisements rated out via rate card. And obviously it's going to vary depending on the student athlete and their, social media following and where they're from. All that will be taken into account with that rate card internally. But then Deloitte, things that we don't know yet, are also going to have their system as well to value out what these things mean. And it's Matt, that's still a very big question as we go through this process on how they're going to do their checks and balances. And we hope to have some clarity on that in the next month or so.
And we've now gotten a lot of that clarity. And a lot of people have argued, I've heard this, that anything above the cap is not true NIL. That's just not true. People have asked, why would Lane Kiffin want to pick LSU over Florida? Why would he leave Ole Miss? Because of LSU's brand. And I know this is going to sound like it's coming from an LSU guy, and if you feel that way, I don't blame you. But it's also undeniable that Angel Reese, Olivia Dunn, like on the cover of Sports Illustrated, Flau'jae Johnson, one of the highest grossing female athletes or athletes of any in the NIL era, Paul Skeens, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase. Think about the LSU brand. That's Jaden Daniels. The LSU brand has exploded in the NIL era. So when you have that to capitalize upon, yes, companies are going to want to do brand deals. And you think about, I'll use OLOL, Our Lady of the Lake, they're a sponsor here on the show. If you live in the Baton Rouge area or around, you've seen television commercials, podcast advertising, radio advertising, billboards with student athletes. Garrett Nussmeier, Jack Pyburn, Flau'jae Johnson as basketball is getting started. Those student athletes go to these day-long video shoots. Nike, I was told, just did a 3-day, 15-hour per day shoot on LSU's campus with some of the student athletes that will be compensated for their time and their deals as part of NILSU Max that facilitated. These are valid deals, but LSU was so proactive. The bottom line is people at some schools may gripe about the clearinghouse, but if you have a strategy, you can facilitate a lot of deals and you can facilitate these deliverables. You can contract. It takes agent discussions and all of these things. LSU has just done it exceptionally well. Like if you're a school and you just try to jam a $200,000 or $300,000 deal through the clearinghouse for someone, from the collective, like, of course that's not going to get approved. Those are the things that are being halted. That's what everyone wanted to stop, was pay for play. LSU now has just done an exceptional job at the forefront of this era with NILSU Max of creating real, legitimate opportunities. And they're comfortable telling Lane Kiffin, we can guarantee you $25 million in NIL deals on top of the rev share money. So you're talking about a $40 million roster, so to speak, or $40 million pumped into your roster. So yes, there's a giant reason why Lane Kiffin financially wants LSU, and it's not just because of the contract he's going to get. LSU, Florida, Ole Miss will all, I've said this from the beginning, they'll all make him the highest paid coach in the country. No team is going to lose out on Lane Kiffin because Ole Miss stopped at 11 and LSU went to 13. Like, that's just not how it's going to go. They're going to pay him what they need to. But it's this. It's the opportunity to sustain success at a scalable level. That's the thing that's going to attract Lane Kiffin. And that's why LSU right now is out front and very likely to land Lane Kiffin as their next football coach. Listen, we still got a long way to go before the Egg Bowl and then potentially, an announcement made the Saturday after the Egg Bowl and maybe an introduction of Lane Kiffin on that Monday following in Baton Rouge. Got a long way to go without a signed agreement. But you can see all of these things lining up, why it makes sense that Lane Kiffin should very well end up in Baton Rouge, as it appears he will. And LSU's positioned itself accordingly. Okay, that'll do it for us here in today's episode. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. Please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review. If you're on YouTube, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video. Remember, we're also every Monday through Friday available on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. So thank you for finding us there as well. And let a friend know if they love the Tigers. We got you here every single day for Locked on LSU, your team every day.